Hi everyone, thanks for joining us again for another Green Living seminar. I'm Dr. Elena Traister here in the Massachusetts College of Liberal Arts Environmental Studies Department. And as many of you now have heard, this semester's Green Living seminar focuses on the theme Nature and Spirituality. All of these presentations take place here in the Feigenbaum Center for Science and Innovation, room 121. They're all free and open to the public. Come on in. And you can find the scheduled upcoming presentations at our website, www.mcla.edu/greenliving. Our presentation today will go for about 40-45 minutes, and we'll have a Q&A session at the end, so please do ask some questions when we come to the end. And before I introduce our speaker, I want to invite you to come back again next week on Wednesday, March 11th. Russell C. Powell, Research Associate at the Harvard Divinity School Center for the Study of World Religions, will present a talk titled Emerson's Transcendentalism and Ecology, Politics Beyond Cynicism. Today's presentation will be given by Hawi Hall. She's the Assistant Director of Counseling and Psychological Services and Community Liaison for Indigenous Students with Cornell Health. Hawi is an Indigenous Mohawk and Cherokee woman raised within the Onondaga Nation, New York, with strong cultural values, connections, and worldviews. The combination of her connection to the natural world and lived experiences within Indigenous community and in the broader U.S. context has informed her own personal growth and healing, as well as significantly shaped her approach to clinical work as mental health provider. She's committed to promoting decolonization in systems, equity, and inclusion for historically marginalized groups. A foundational belief that Hawi holds is that the work, both personally and professionally, is that our relationship to the natural world is one of reciprocity, interdependence, and stewardship. We're so happy to have you joining us. Thank you so much. I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you so much. Can everybody hear me okay? Wonderful. Well, I wanted to thank you all for joining tonight. I'm really excited to talk a little bit with you all about my worldview as an Indigenous person. And I do want to state, I'll share my screen in just a second, but I did want to state that even with my identities being both Mohawk and Cherokee, I am one person within both of those nations and groups of people, and I do not speak on behalf of all of them, right? Each of us individually within a group of people of identity-based group of folks, we cannot speak on behalf of everybody. So you might encounter other folks that are Cherokee and Haudenosaunee that grew up within Mohawk and Onondaga territories that have slightly different views, and that's okay. So I'm excited to share with you all today. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And if you bear with me 1 second, I will do that. We did troubleshoot this before and I moved stuff around, so give me 1 second here. Can you all see my screen? Perfect. Okay. So my presentation today is called Toniondun Hakne Ogwat Nigula. And what that means is we bring our minds together as one, or we come to one mind on a topic. So I'm going to share with you a little bit about nature, well-being, and the Indigenous perspective on the interconnectedness of people and creation. So I'm going to introduce myself in my language, as that's how I was taught to do. So Wahieñhawi Yungyaks, Ganyag Geha, Dino Chalagi, Niwoko Wajoda, Oskanundu, Dino Olunya, Niwaki Daloda, Agwazasni, Nidawagenu. So what I said to you is, my name is Wahieñhawi. I go by Hawi, which is the last 4 letters of my first name. I use she, her pronouns. I am both Mohawk and Cherokee, and I'm of the Blue Clan of the Cherokee Nation, but I sit within the Deer Clan within the Haudenosaunee Confederacy. And I'm from Agwazasni Mohawk territory up in northern New York. So as was mentioned, I work here at Cornell University. I have a couple different titles. I'm the Indigenous Student Community Liaison, which means I work directly with our Indigenous students and I'm also the assistant director of our embedded therapy program. So I would be remiss to not start a presentation with the land acknowledgement. And so I think it's really important to know the land, the traditional homelands of whom you're residing on. And so for us here in Ithaca, we are on the Gayokono homelands, which is in English, that's the Cayuga Nation. So the land acknowledgement that I will read you is one that Cornell has created in conjunction with the Gayokono leadership. So Cornell University is located on the traditional homelands of the Gayokono, the Cayuga Nation. The Gayokono are members of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, an alliance of 6 sovereign nations with a historic and contemporary presence on this land. The Confederacy precedes the establishment of Cornell University, New York State, and the United States of America. We acknowledge the painful history of the Gayokono dispossession and honor the ongoing connection of Gayokono people, past, present, and future, to these lands and waters. That portion has been reviewed and approved by traditional Gayokono leadership and Cornell administration. In addition to the Gayokono land acknowledgement, but separate from it, the American Indian and Indigenous Studies program faculty would like to emphasize Cornell's founding was enabled in the course of a national genocide by the sale of almost 1 million acres of stolen Indian land under the Morrill Act of 1862. To date, the university has neither officially acknowledged its complicity in this theft, nor has it offered any form of restitution to the hundreds of Native communities impacted. I start with the land acknowledgement intentionally because throughout my presentation, I hope that you are able to understand and walk away with a sense of what the meaning of land is to us as Indigenous people, and recognizing that it's not, from our perspective, it's not something that you own, right? It's not an item. It's not transactional. And so the land acknowledgement is important because it's valuable to know who was displaced from that homelands that you're standing on, that you're occupying, and recognizing what that displacement meant to the Indigenous people that originally occupied the lands. So I'm going to move forward, and hopefully I'll come back to that point at the end to kind of help give a little bit of a different understanding of what it means to be removed from our lands as Indigenous people. So as I had mentioned, I grew up at the Onondaga Nation, but my family is Wahieñhawi, which is Mohawk. And so this map shows you the geographic locations historically and currently of the 6 nations of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy. So the Haudenosaunee Confederacy consists of 6 nations. Originally there were 5. You can see on the bottom, the Tuscarora arrived into New York and joined our Confederacy in 1713. But you can see geographic locations on here as to where in proximity to the other nations each one was located and what sort of land was occupied. So as you can see, the Mohawks were the keepers of the eastern door of the Confederacy, and we occupied most of what is now eastern New York, right? The Mohawk Valley up into Canada, what is now Canada, was our homelands. You can see also that the small purple dots are where we reside currently. So I think, again, it's just important to recognize as Indigenous folks that we had originally occupied much larger areas of space. And now we've been kind of confined to much smaller spaces, and the Cayuga Nation actually has no territory. So this map is incorrect. They actually have no reservation or reserved land for them. So you might hear the Haudenosaunee referred to as the Iroquois. That was a name given us by the French, and that translates loosely to something along the lines of snake eaters, and that is not how we refer to ourselves. So Haudenosaunee means the people of the longhouse. So that's how we refer to ourselves. There is, again, the 6 nations being Tuscarora, Seneca, Cayuga, Onondaga, Oneida, and Mohawk. So I'm going to play a video for you. This Ohendukaluadekwe is how you say this word. And what that loosely translates to is the words that come before all else. In my culture, we are instructed to give thanks. And that's such a foundational part of our lives, of our understanding of how we express appreciation for the natural world, And it's also been taught to us that these are our original instructions as to how to interact with the natural world. So we as Haudenosaunee people believe that we are fortunate to still have our original instructions that were given to us by the Creator. So this Thanksgiving address is another way that they refer to this speech. When said in its full entirety, is very detailed and actually can take up to a couple hours. The clip I have for you here is about 3 to 4 minutes, so no worries. We'll have other time to talk about other things. But you'll get an idea of kind of what it is that, like, on a day-to-day basis, we are encouraged to intentionally express appreciation for. These words are said at the beginning of all meetings or gatherings, as well as intended to be said before ceremonies, and it's how we're supposed to greet the day in the morning. So if you can imagine every morning waking up and greeting the day, greeting the sunshine with words of thanksgiving for all of creation, just the kind of tone that that would set for you. So I'm gonna go ahead and play this video for you all, and we'll move forward after this. Okay.
The Thanksgiving Address, Onondaga, words before all else. These words of thanksgiving come to us from the native people known as the Haudenosaunee, also Iroquois or Six Nations, Mohawk, Oneida, Cayuga, Onondaga, Seneca, and Tuscarora of upstate New York and Canada. The Thanksgiving Address has ancient roots dating back over 1,000 years to the formation of the Great Law of Peace by a man called the Peacemaker, and perhaps before that. Today these words are still spoken at the opening and closing of all ceremonial and governmental gatherings held by the Six Nations. A speaker is chosen to give the Thanksgiving address on behalf of all people. They choose their own words, for we are all unique and have our own style, but the general form is traditional. It follows an order in which we can relate to all of the creation. The address is based on the belief that the world cannot be taken for granted, that a spiritual communication of thankfulness and acknowledgement of all living things must be given to align the minds and hearts of the people with nature. This forms a guiding principle of culture. We believe that all people at one time in their history had similar words to acknowledge the works of the Creator. With this in mind, we offer these words in written form as a way to reacquaint ourselves with this shared vision. You are invited, encouraged to share in these words, that our concentrated attention might help us to rediscover our balance, respect, and oneness with nature. Now our minds are one.
Giungiukwa sa Hoseas ano ang gadaswa o hantaglodekwa. Agwego aska ang dito tuwahwe nuni ne agwanigula dano de tino latus ne anunkwa sua dano yakinista ahunja. Tonio dohak ne agwanigula.
Tau. Agwego aska de wawa nuni ne agwanigula dano de tino latu ne anunkat sua dano gaju sua. Tonio dohak ne agwanigula. Tau.
Agwego aska dito wahwe nuni ne agwanigula dano de tino latu ne G-Sankwaya Doi, Dano Gayan Tosla, Tonio Duhak, Nangwanigula.
Tau.
Agwego aska ang dito tuwahwe nuni ne agwanigula dano de tino latus ne anunkwa sua dano gondilio. Tonio dohak ne agwanigula.
Tau. Agwego aska de wawa nuni ne agwanigula dano de tino ladu ne ogwila sua dano oji don agua. Tonio dohak ne agwanigula. Tau.
Agwego aska dito wahwe nuni ne agwanigula dano de tino lados ne gaeli nigawilage dano yokisotagua lediwelas. Tonio Duhak ne agwanigula.
Tau.
Agwego aska ang dito tuwahwe nuni ne agwanigula dano de tino latus ne gyokaneka galakwa dano asotaneka galakwa. Tonio dohak ne agwanigula.
Tau. Agwego aska de wawa nuni ne agwanigula dano de tino ladu ne oji stunkwa sua dano gaeli ni angwadige. Tonio Duhak ne agwanigula. Tau.
Agwego aska dito wahwe nuni ne agwanigula dano donchinu no walados ne sagwayan dizo. Tonio Duhak ne agwanigula.
Tau.
Ana wagaliuha donga noa vinizalate doga tenisike nigoha ne iziki aisotos asundalaya soasa. Tonio dohak ne agwanigula.
So, let me advance my slide. So with that video, before we dive too much into this one, what they essentially were giving thanks for, and they had kind of outlined this in the beginning, recognizing that the Thanksgiving address is intended to start with our Mother Earth and work its way up. And so we start by acknowledging our Mother Earth. And again, you can imagine how detailed one speaker can get around just everything that our Mother Earth gives to us. And you'll notice in a lot of the references, if you look further into this Thanksgiving address, that there's kinship relationships with all of the natural world, right? It's even said that in our language, there's no word for nature, as that implies something that's separate from myself. And so we see ourselves as in direct relationship with the natural world. So starting with our mother, the earth, we give thanks, and then we talk about and kind of go into detail in a lot of times in a lot of the speeches around the waters and the fishes and the plants and the medicines, the bugs. We give thanks for the life-giving foods. We give thanks for the winged animals and the four-legged animals and the winds. And so it works its way up. The rains and the thunders, right? Our elder brother, the sun, our grandmother, the moon, the stars. So we work our way all the way up through creation. And that's how we start all of our ceremonial gatherings, our meetings, as well as, like I said, the way that we're intended to greet the day. One of the other concepts that I think is really important, even though I showed you the map to start regarding kind of the traditional homelands of the different nations of the Haudenosaunee, there's also this understanding that we didn't have lines, right? And so, there's the one dish, one spoon treaty, and you can see that a picture, a replica of what that wampum looked like. And so our treaties were marked by wampums, which, if you're familiar with any kind of wampums that Haudenosaunee would make, they were made from quahog shells. And so those would come from our brothers and sisters down along the Atlantic Ocean, right? So there was trading that was done. So the shells were then taken and kind of really meticulously designed into these beads that were put together to indicate agreement or an alliance, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, where there's a treaty belt that commemorates the Confederacy and coming together. And now that's kind of what you'll see oftentimes as used as our flag that people fly, but it's indicative of an agreement. So this one dish, one spoon treaty was from somewhere around 1140, back between the Haudenosaunee and the Anishinaabe. And so the Anishinaabe are Ojibwe and Chippewa. That's who kind of makes up the Anishinaabe. And so those nations are a little bit west of what's now New York State. And so again, recognizing that we weren't necessarily stationary folks, right? We moved, we had recognized how to plant and move our villages to kind of not deplete the grounds too much in one area. So our villages would move around. And so for the most part, we understood our relationship to the natural world and how to take care of it. This one dish, one spoon treaty really marks an understanding and an agreement between the Anishinaabe and the Haudenosaunee that was intended to protect the next 7 generations. And that might be something some of you have heard before as a reference within Indigenous communities, Haudenosaunee specifically, but we talk often about being aware of the impact that our decisions today will have on the next 7 generations. And that's how we're instructed to move through the world, right? And our leaders are instructed to make decisions thinking 7 generations down. And so this agreement really marked kind of 3 pieces that you don't take more than you need. So we recognize that there was overlap of the lands that we lived on and that we hunted on and that we used. And we recognize one of the pieces I was raised with is you don't take the first of any kind of berry or medicine, and you don't take the last, right? There's this understanding that like you take what you need, but you make sure that you're allowing the plant or medicine or foods to be able to replenish itself. You always leave something for others, right? So greediness and greed were not really values that we had as Indigenous folks. It's actually a more colonized kind of concept to be out for oneself. And then keep the dish clean, right? So understanding that we all have a responsibility. If we're all eating from this same dish and there's only one spoon, we have to all be responsible and accountable to keeping it clean and tending to it so that it could be available and there for others. So in the in the image here, the symbol is of Mother Earth, which is meant to be the dish, right? And then the beaver tail was what was used as the one spoon that everybody would use to eat. So you can see that even in our relationships with other nations that were surrounding us, we all had an understanding of how to coexist and how to all tend to our Mother Earth to make sure that it could continue to support and sustain all of us. One of the pieces that I think is really beautiful, and it was mentioned in that video that I just shared, is this concept that as Haudenosaunee people, we still have our original instructions, and that everybody at some point was indigenous to some land, right? And some groups of people have been removed for longer due to colonialism and displacement. And many of the people in the world have forgotten their original instructions. And I think it's so beautiful that in that video, they intentionally state, here's some words that you can use, right, to help kind of reconnect for yourself. And I'm a firm believer that that's why so many people find such resonance with indigenous practices and beliefs, is because it resonates with all of us in some way, that there's some part of our ancestry, there's some part of our DNA, our lineage, our heritage, intrinsically that feels a connection, because at one point, everybody had a more direct connection. So one of the pieces that I think is important, and so now that you have a little bit of an understanding around the relationship and kind of how we view and interact with the natural world, it puts a different way of understanding the intentionality of settler colonialism and the intention behind that, right? So if you think about what I just talked about in terms of our relationship as Indigenous folks to each other and to the world, and like the balance that we understood, the intentionality of care and appreciation, stewardship, and then you look at the principles of settler colonialism, they are in direct opposition to everything that we stood for as Indigenous folks, and by design was intended to fragment and eradicate us as Indigenous folks. And I'm not going to go too far into that realm, but I think for me, this is a really important point that I try really intentionally to bring up when I have the opportunity to speak, because again, this then ties back into that point I made in the beginning of now having a different kind of understanding when there's a land acknowledgement, and how as an Indigenous person at Cornell, I don't speak for Cornell in this regard, and I'll be the first to say that, but I feel as though our land acknowledgement is performative because there's no action behind it. And I know that I've spoken with other Indigenous folks here, and we've been trying with intention to get Cornell to take some action to have reciprocity, right? Because again, understanding the Gayokono people lived, and the Gayokono were a nation of people. It wasn't a village, it was a nation of people. The Haudenosaunee are made up of 6 sovereign individual nations that have joined a confederacy and alliance together. Cornell displaced. This was like the hub at the bottom of Cayuga Lake. Beautiful area here. Cornell displaced the Gayokono Nation in order to establish this university. And so thinking then about, as an Indigenous person, my connection to the land, right? My responsibility to take care of and steward the land, to abruptly just sever that tie for not just the person, but an entire nation, really is like a wound that's never been able to be healed. And I think that for me as an Indigenous person, again, I take every opportunity to try to just raise an awareness to the fact here at Cornell. I put this into people's laps every chance I get, is you are a direct recipient of the displacement. You benefit from the displacement, whether you like it or not, of the Gayokono people. And what are you actively doing to help steward the land, to help with reconciliation of different kinds, to help care for the natural world in the absence of the original people that were here as caretakers? So I leave that with you as another kind of way to consider your own relationship with the land that you stand on, and acknowledging who was displaced in order for you to be there today, and how you're working to reconcile that for yourself, and how you're able to kind of work to give back. So I'm not going to play this video. This is a song. It's actually one of my favorite songs by the group called Ulali. They're phenomenal. If you want to look them up when you have a chance, I would strongly suggest it. So I've kind of already alluded to this, so I'm not going to go too far into it. As a mental health provider, right, I work directly with people, and my history before coming to Cornell was working in Indigenous communities. I worked in the Mohawk community in our community mental health program there. And before that, I worked at the Onondaga Nation. And I just need to name that the impact that settler colonialism has had on Indigenous people, right? It probably goes without saying, but it's profound. It's so profound, and there's efforts to heal, and there's movements to try to have programs to help promote well-being and wellness. And it's hard to do that when there's still systems that are working against us. And so there's generational sorts of trauma, right? There's different ways that the government has really worked to kind of separate us as Indigenous folks from that connection to land, right? There's been real efforts to, and I'm going to quote, kill the Indian, save the man, because they recognize that with our connection to the natural world, that was preventing them from being able to access those resources. So that's resulted in all of these now current problems, challenges, traumas that we face as Indigenous folks. And so part of what I think is also important to note is, as Indigenous folks, there's a lot of us that have relocated to areas that are completely separate from our culture for a lot of survival reasons, whether it be to find work or because it wasn't, there was an impact of colonialism through the church that caused Indigenous folks to really resist and push against our Indigenous practices. And so there's been this shift for a lot of Indigenous folks into more urban areas for a lot of reasons. That's also kind of a continued way that like our culture continues to be compromised, right? If we don't have folks to continue to practice and continue to learn and teach, then it can be really challenging to pass that knowledge on to the next generation. I do want to note environmental racism. This is a very real problem within many Indigenous communities. For example, here in central New York, we have just north of here is where the Onondaga Nation is. That's where I grew up. And whenever they put the interstate in the early to mid 1900s, they put it straight through the Onondaga Nation. And then they came in and they started to mine for gravel. I don't even know. It's just always been the gravel mines is how we always saw it growing up. And that's pretty common, where the outside forces, the government or other agencies find that there's resources and they come in and they extract them. And so there's a lot of mining that happens on our territories. Haudenosaunee is the Mohawk territory I'm from, and that's up the St. Lawrence. Part of our territory is in what's now Canada and parts in New York. And so the St. Lawrence goes right through it. And so you can imagine, as a territory that has a major river plus many smaller rivers going through it, we were incredibly reliant on the waterways and the fish. And that was a big part of our livelihood. And wouldn't you know it, Reynolds came and planted their factory right a mile or so upstream and polluted our waters. And there's significant issues now with cancers and toxins in our land, our foods, and in our waters. So environmental racism is absolutely a concern as well. Again, just some of the intentionality around trying to fragment us from our connection to the natural world, to our Mother Earth. I'm going to pass that. Oh, I have this video, and this is an elder from my community. This is a short video. This man's name is Tom Porter. He has some books if you are interested in learning about Mohawk teachings. He has one called What Grandma Said, and it's about teachings from his grandmother. And so he's amazing. I'm going to go ahead and play this video because I think he's pretty profound. Feel free to look him up in your free time if you are interested, but he's incredibly knowledgeable. He had shared at an event I had been to recently that he was, it was relayed to him through a vision or a dream in his younger years that his purpose here on this earth was to share his message. And so he does that very freely. So I'm going to go ahead and share this little clip with you all now.
So everything is spiritual, the whole universe. And us, we're just only one little speck. And our uncles always told us the trees don't need us. to continue to live. We need them because they make air, oxygen. They make apple and orange and cherries and plums, bananas and all kind of fruits. We need them. The birds need them. Water, they don't need you and I. If we disappear, all humans, they continue on. Sun don't need us either. We need the sun though. So everything is reverse. All those things is what we depend on, that we live. It's not the other way.
So with that concept, one of the things that Tom will talk about when he has the opportunity is the concept of their minds being colonized. And I think it's such a profound way to look at how each of us move through the world, and recognizing the impact of colonialism and the way that we see ourselves in relation to each other, to the world, to the natural world, to our Mother Earth even, right? And so part of what I challenge everybody is to work to recognize where those values are, maybe have been taught to you implicitly or explicitly, and then becoming aware and working to intentionally shift that. And so the next concept I offer you is something that we call Gotnigolire or Gotnigohio. So Gotnigoline is in Mohawk and Gotnigohio is in Onondaga. But it means the same thing. It means essentially a good mind. And I teach this practice as the Indigenous Student Community Liaison here at Cornell. I work with the Indigenous students and we talk about this. We have programs and events and conversations that are mental health in basis, but infused with cultural concepts. Because one of the most beautiful parts of Indigenous culture and communities is that we work to promote well-being, right? And that is in such contrast to the Western perspective and approach to mental health, where they wait until you become unwell and they treat illness. And I'm a part of the profession, so I fully understand that. But I think that there's so much benefit in looking at it from the other side. How can I instead treat myself as this being with these different components to myself and attend to all of these with intention? So under the concept of Gotnigolia, then I consider, how do I talk to myself? What are the thoughts that I have, the beliefs I have? How do I see myself within the world, right? So my mind, how am I attending to my mind? How am I attending to my body? What am I doing for my body? Oftentimes, I tie into all of these parts of self, ways to use the resources around us, right? I get to choose with intention to be outdoors and help my mind to be calm by giving thanks, right? That is such a beautiful way to start my day. And if I'm feeling stressed or anxious or overwhelmed, what I do is I can just pause and step outside and breathe, and I can listen to the birds, and I can notice the wind, or I can notice like the sensations that are out there, and I can really rely on the outside world, the natural world, to help kind of just balance me back out. My dad and I used to run when I was younger. We'd train for races and whatnot, and he used to, when we'd run on trail runs or run through the woods, he would intentionally touch trees as we would go by them, and he's like, they energize you. And I don't know if you've ever tried to hug a tree. It's literally like energizing, almost vibrates when you hug it, and you can just allow yourself to be present in that moment, not worrying about what you look like, but allowing yourself to just feel that moment. It's alive. And what I try to help our students understand here also is that if I truly believe that there's spiritual energy, there's spiritual existence in all of the natural world, the trees, the four-legged animals, the winds, the rains, the thunders, then I can never be alone, right? It's almost like anxiety and depression are a byproduct of the impact of settler colonialism, because as Indigenous folks, we had connection, not only with each other, but with everything around us. It was nearly impossible to feel isolated or alone when I believe that I'm surrounded by living beings and creatures. So you can see the rest of kind of the concepts I tend to talk to students about. I don't want to belabor this too much because I know that we are running low on time, and so I have a couple more slides. And so this kind of gets back to more Haudenosaunee specific, some of the values that we embody and how that kind of looks. And so part of what, again, going back to the idea of the difference, I think, between some of the more Western concepts, settler colonialism impacts, and our traditional values is that there's a whole system of connection, right? We not only have our family system, we have a clan system, and then we have a whole village, we have a whole community. And so operating in isolation is not a thing, right? That is not a part of like our traditional way of existing. That's definitely something that again has kind of come with some of the more intentional fragmenting as a result of settler colonialism. We have a more contemporary view of ourselves, right? We have the ability to have a shared identity, a shared purpose. There's this beautiful concept in Haudenosaunee communities that our role is to lift each other up, right? I'm not going to get too far into the weeds around some of our ceremonies or practices, but for example, when there's a death or when there's a wedding, specifically, those two I can think of, the speeches that are given to the community in those situations is essentially letting folks know, like, your responsibility is to help lift these people in the time of a death, to help support them as they go through this loss. And when it's a wedding, the community's responsibility is to be there to support each other, to notice if one is struggling or going astray, and your job is to gently redirect them back and help support them. So again, it's this understanding that we're all connected, we're all in this together. Teaching the next generation, I put that on here because, again, the intentionality of fragmenting us from our connection to the land, to the natural world, or understanding that traditional knowledge, right, that Onondaga that I was shared earlier, that's our original instructions. And so we have a responsibility for us, and I recognize I have a privilege because I was raised within community and I have that knowledge. My responsibility is to share that, right? I can share everything that I possibly can with whoever wants to hear, and I do that. And that's why I'm really open when people ask me to speak on this sort of topic, because I think it's a valuable worldview, a valuable way to see myself within relationship to everything else around me, right? I'm not operating in isolation. I am connected to everything else, and there's so much value in that, and there's so much change and healing that could happen in the world if that was a more commonly shared value. Interconnectedness, I talked about this already a little bit. Everyone has a role. I think that's really important. Recognizing that there's life in all of the natural world around us, right? Recognizing I can sit near the water if I'm feeling sad, and the water is energy. The water pulls the sadness off of me. I can sit and I can just allow myself to let go and allow the water to move things away. Again, the concept of promoting well-being, attending to various aspects of self. There's a medicine wheel concept that really does kind of give a nice visual that has 4 components to it. You can include more if you'd like, but typically that's inclusive of mental, emotional, spiritual, and physical aspects of self. And again, being intentional around attending to those parts of self. Utilizing the relationship with the natural world to promote well-being. As I use it almost with every single student that I work with as a therapist, I use the natural world as some sort of way to ground themselves or to promote well-being, or as an intervention at times even. And then we have a relationship with the medicines, and I'm going to come back to that because there's medicines all around us in the natural world, and part of what Western medicine has taught us is that the traditional medicines aren't as effective, and we should rely more on the medications that have a side effect and you need another medication for. But in reality, I was raised with traditional medicines, and it was a very different way of living. There was a tea for every sort of illness that we had, for every sort of condition. There was medicines, there was salves. And so I think there's a whole different realm out there. And again, I would encourage you to be curious if you're interested around what are some of the traditional medicines that grow in your area, and how can you, with respect, lean into using some of that. Part of the way that we pick our medicines is we go out when it's picking time, right? So there are seasons when things can be picked. But we put down an offering of tobacco. Tobacco is one of our medicines And we put down an offering of tobacco as like a barter, as a recognition of us taking that plant. And we express appreciation. We give thanks for that medicine and our ability to use this medicine to help our families or our own health. So there's always this expression of appreciation and recognition. The same thing is done during the hunting practices and fishing practices. You don't just take a life and just take it because we have the right to take it. You take it, but you give words. You express appreciation, and we recognize that this animal sacrificed its life so that me and my family could continue ours. So there's this understanding and appreciation in all of our practices. And then this is a slide that is residual from last presentation that I did, but I wanted to leave it in here because I think it's really important to recognize the different ways that as Indigenous folks, we are able to honor and respect our connection to the natural world. And so on the left-hand side, you can see me and my sibling and my kids, and we are at our powwow back home. And you can see on our regalia, there's beadwork that reflects the natural world because that's a big part of who we are. Wahieñhawi, my name means she brings the berries. And so my son's vest, it's kind of covered with his satchel, but you can see it has berries on it and his medallion in honor of me. On the top right, you can see my son playing lacrosse. Lacrosse is one of our traditional games, and that is traditionally played with a wooden stick. And then you can see my sibling in the middle. They're a hip hop artist, but they use their platform to advocate for Indigenous rights and sovereignty. They're an Indigenous farmer, and they're working actively for to bring back some of our seeds to kind of continue to rematriate some of those practices. So I'm going to go ahead and pause my sharing. Is the end of my presentation. So I hope, again, my whole point in doing this presentation with you all was really to help just give you an understanding, maybe a potentially different understanding around the relationship that we have as Indigenous folks to the natural world. And in our absence from our homelands, really wanting to call all of you all in to find ways to give back to the land, to caretake of the land there, to be stewards of the land. And that can be even simple things like, I'm going to join these different initiatives to help restore certain areas or help maintain the waterways or whatever it might look like. But that's my gentle call to you all, right? If we can all take some form of action, I really believe that we can make this more sustainable in terms of how long this earth will last, because as it's going, it's kind of daunting. But I appreciate all of you all and your attention and your willingness to sit and listen. And I'd love to open it up for any kind of questions that you all have.